We are about to embark upon a series of strange and exciting, dangerous adventures. Adventures that will lead us to all parts of the world.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Crime Syndicate Issue 1. This is a 6-issue miniseries from DC Comics in 2021. Written by Andy Schmidt. Kieran McKeown was the penciler. Dexter Vines inker. Steve Oliff colorist. Rob Leigh letterer. Cover by Jim Chung and Romulo Fajardo Jr. Marquis Draper assistant editor. Brian Cunningham editor. I like the cover. It's cool looking. Gives you an idea what you can expect, but it is kind of a pin-up, but there is enough there that you'll get the idea. So we've got a rewriting of history in this story. America was founded by Benedict Arnold, and instead of Washington, D.C., it's Arnold, and a lot of things are different. For one thing, Ultraman is the self-appointed ruler of Metropolis. The president is Oliver Queen, and he is hooking up with Superwoman, who is apparently Donna Troy, and something is going on across the world. We've got a couple other superpowered people. We've got Power Ring, who is Jon Stewart in this iteration, and he automatically kills a cop and a thief for different reasons. Then we've got a guy named Quick, who's their version of the Flash, and somebody named Atomica, who is the Atom, effectively. Well, Starro shows up and is causing problems, and that means different things to different people, so we're gonna see how that plays out. There's a backup story which sort of abruptly starts. They should have had the title card on the first page of this because it really threw you off. It looked like the book was over, then suddenly there's more story randomly, and we learn how Ultraman came to be who he is, and how the people that adopted him, which I guess are the Kents, were kind of exploiting him for free labor. And yeah, that's a pretty dark story. This whole book's pretty interesting. It's a very dark take on the DC universe. It's well written for a villain book, and it's an interesting interpretation of the characters, and definitely has a lot of potential as a supervillain book. It's not really my thing, but it's well done for what it is. I might pick up another issue, but I don't really think I'm the target audience for this. I like superheroes, not villains, but I can see why this is going to have a lot of people enjoying it. I don't particularly like some of the art. I think people's faces look weird and exaggerated quite a bit, so I'm not a giant fan. There's some really good panels, but there's a lot of mediocre stuff in here too. Pretty mixed bag. The backup story about Ultraman's origin is actually done a little better. I would say if you're into villain books, you'll probably like this, or if you're an old Crime Syndicate fan from the old days, you'll probably dig it. But for the average person, I'd say grab it out of a discount bin or wait for the trade. It's not something I think people are going to want to rush out and get, but it is well done for what it is. So I'll recommend it on that front, but just not for me. That'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links to my Patreon, Streamlabs, and Teespring store are in the description. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.
We are about to embark upon a series of strange and exciting, dangerous adventures. Adventures that will lead us to all parts of the world.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Crime Syndicate Issue 2. This is a 2021 miniseries from DC Comics, written by Andy Schmidt. Kieran McKeown was the penciler, Dexter Vines inker, Steve Oliff colorist, Rob Leigh letterer. I have the variant cover by Tyler Kirkham and Arif Prianto. The regular covers by Jim Chung and Romulo Fajardo Jr. Assistant editor Marquis Draper. Alex Card was the editor. So we get to see Owlman fighting some of these Starro creatures, and Oliver Queen and Superwoman are doing their best as well, and Superwoman is looking forward to beating on Ultraman. Now that fight goes on for quite a while and is pretty interesting. Meanwhile, Owlman manages to establish quite a bit of information from these creatures, and he knew something was funny going on, why they didn't go after Gotham City. But we also learn his origin later in the book. We'll get to that in a second. But Power Ring, or whatever they're calling him now, has to fight these creatures as well, and we get a really interesting cliffhanger ending, and I don't want to give too much away, but there is some crazy twists and turns in here that I did not expect. Then the backup story, which is really short and probably appropriately so, is an origin story for Owlman, and that's written by Andy Schmidt with Brian Hitch as artist, Alex Sinclair colors, and Rob Leigh letters. And it's not Bruce Wayne that's Owlman, and that was really interesting. We get to find out why he became Owlman, because originally he was a crime fighter, and some interesting things happened that kind of changed that perspective. I was interested in that. That was really well done. Brian Hitch's art art is pretty solid, and both the stories had pretty decent art. The main story, I'm not a huge fan of this art style. Everybody's face looks a little weird at times. There's definitely some anime inspiration in here somewhere, but it was better than average, I would say. The backup story had much better art, in my opinion. I think it's just a stylistic difference, but overall, this was a really fun story. I'm not a big supervillain fan, so I had a hard time deciding whether or not to keep going with this book, because while the first issue did seem like it was going somewhere and it was interesting, I just have a hard time rooting for villains. But this is really well done, and it's a fun reimagining of the Crime Syndicate from a basically evil universe. So I will recommend this. I thought it was really well done, and I will pick up issue 3. The backup origin story, generally backups are boring and a worthless waste of paper, was actually good, and it's a nice concise origin story. I think they're going to do that for most of the Crime Syndicate, and that'd be fine with me. So I'm looking forward to reading issue 3, which is pretty rare for me with a supervillain book, so that should say something about its quality. If you get a chance to check it out, I would say do so. You might want to pick it up before the price goes up on these stupid books. With DC raising prices on a lot of their books, I'll probably going to be cutting a lot of books out of my purchase lineup. Hopefully this won't be one of them, but if it does go up, I probably will drop it. So until then, I would say check it out. It's worth a cover price, and that's pretty rare these days. That'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to support the channel in other ways, share the video on your social media, get yourself something nice from the Teespring store, or drop a donation to the Patreon or Streamlabs. Those links are all in the description, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one.
We are about to embark upon a series of strange and exciting, dangerous adventures. Adventures that will lead us to all parts of the world.
Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Crime Syndicate issue 3. This is a 6-part limited series from DC Comics in 2021. Written by Andy Schmidt, pencils by Kieran McKeown, Dexter Vines inker, Steve Oliff colorist, Rob Lay letterer, covered by David Finch and Romulo Fajardo Jr., assistant editor Marquis Draper, Alex Carr editor. Cover's pretty cool and it does relate to what's going on. So Starro has taken control of many people, and we get some background on him about what's going on, but the Crime Syndicate has figured out how to exploit a weakness. Alexander Luthor shows up to try and protect some citizens, but Crime Syndicate doesn't care about that, and for some reason Luthor's black. I don't know what that's all about, but race swapping seems to be the flavor of the month at DC, so kind of expected. Well, Superwoman does a lot of the heavy lifting, and we learn Starro's real motivation, which is a lot different than you would expect from Starro. So we end up with a sort of Watchmen moment, and the world becomes much more aware of metahumans. There's not a lot to say about this without ruining more of the issue, so I'm going to kind of leave it at that. But the backup story is about how Donna Troy came to be Superwoman and what happened to Steve Trevor, which is pretty surprising actually. And that backup story is written by Andy Schmidt, art by Brian Hitch, Alex Sinclair on colors, and Rob Lay letters. The backup story was good. The main story actually got a lot better with this issue. It really does show the self-centeredness and juvenile nature of a lot of the Crime Syndicate, especially Ultraman, who seems to be incredibly narcissistic and almost like a perpetual 12-year-old with his mentality, mostly probably because of his unchecked power. But it was a really interesting story, and it looks like there's going to be something interesting coming up next issue. There's only 3 issues left, so it looks like they're doing a couple of short story arcs. The backup stories about the origins is a really good way to introduce them. So this is a pretty solid book for $4. The art style is pretty consistent, and it's not bad. It's not my favorite because people look a little blocky and their heads look a little big sometimes, but it's not bad. The backup art is really good with Brian Hitch. I think he's a pretty solid artist most of the time, so I think it's worth checking out if you're into supervillain books. If you're looking for heroic action, you're not going to find it here, but for a villain book, this is definitely one of the better written ones, and actually one of the better written DC books right now, so it's worth a read, especially if you're an old Crime Syndicate fan. You'll get something out of it, so I'll recommend it if you're into that sort of thing. That'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links to my Patreon, Streamlabs, or pick yourself something up nice from the Teespring store are in the description, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Crime Syndicate issue 4. This is a 6-part miniseries from DC Comics in 2021, written by Andy Schmidt, pencils by Kieran McCown, Dexter Vines the inker, Steve Oliff was the colorist, Rob Leigh the letterer. I have the variant cover by Kerry Randolph and Peter Steigerwald, Marquis Draper, assistant editor, Andrea Shea, editor. The cover's okay, it's kind of boring. I would have picked up this cover if it wasn't the last one, mostly because it's an extra $1 for an unexciting pinup. So, kind of a waste. So we get to see Quick and Atomica running around causing havoc. Emerald Knight is looking on and seeing what's going on, but he decides to protect his city by putting up a defensive shield around it and effectively trapping everyone inside. Alexander Luthor is trying to put a team together to stop the Crime Syndicate, but that's not exactly working out as well as it probably could be. Meanwhile, Superwoman and Owlman go to Ultraman's Fortress of Solitude, or whatever they're calling it in this one, and she reveals a little bit of a secret to him that helps kind of solidify their team up. Meanwhile, one of the Crime Syndicate might be getting recruited for Luthor's team, and we get a bit of a cliffhanger ending. Now, there is a backup story about the origin of Emerald Knight, and this is written by Andy Schmidt with art by Brian Hitch, Alex Sinclair colors, Rob Leigh letters. It's an interesting origin, and it does kind of show us what the power ring can do, and in this issue, in the main story, we learn how the ring can influence people and effectively corrupt them. So that was pretty interesting. This was a pretty fun issue. The art was okay. Not my favorite, but not the worst I've ever seen. It's just kind of middle of the road for modern art. I think it probably isn't quite ready for one of the big two, but there are some really good panels in here. I think the proportions need to be worked on so that heads don't look slightly larger than the neck and body proportion. Otherwise, it was fine. And the backup story had really solid art by Brian Hitch. So I think overall it was a good installment in the miniseries, but we'll see how next issue goes. This one was definitely more story building, not a whole lot of action, but there was some, and it was worth checking out. So if you've been reading the miniseries, this is a good installment, but it's not a great standalone. It's an okay jumping on point because it's the start of a new story arc, but you really have to have read the first 3 issues to get the most out of this issue. So I will recommend it if you're planning on reading the miniseries. If you're just jumping in, it might lose you a little bit on what's going on, but it's not the worst place you could jump into a miniseries. So that being said, it's a recommendation, but not at the $5 cover price. It's definitely not worth that. If you can find it for $3 or $4, I'd say pick it up. If you're grabbing it out of a discount bin for $1 or $2, it's definitely worth that, and it'd probably be worth reading the whole miniseries for that price. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out, you can share the video around on your social media or buy yourself something nice from the Teespring store. All those links are in the description, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Crime Syndicate issue 5. This is a 6-part miniseries from DC Comics in 2021, written by Andy Schmidt, pencils by Kieran McCown, Dexter Vines was the inker, Stephen Oliff colorist, Rob Leigh letterer, cover by Howard Porter and Romulo Fajardo Jr., Marquis Draper was the assistant editor, Andrea Shea, editor, Chris Conroy, senior editor. Cover's okay, but it doesn't really tell you anything about what's going on. So Lonar is with some of the other Legion of Justice, and they are going to apprehend Johnny Quick and Atomica. Things don't quite go according to plan, and although they do seem to have somewhat of a victory, it's not a real good victory. We also learned Johnny Quick didn't just kill the 100 people on the bridge that day a couple issues ago, but he also killed some other people that may have been a little closer to his home. And the Crime Syndicate gets wind of what's going on, and they manage to go after Luthor's satellite. And we're left with a cliffhanger ending that actually is a pretty good twist. There is a backup story called The Quick and the Dead. It's the origin of Johnny Quick by Andy Schmidt, art by Brian Hitch, Alex Sinclair colors, Rob Leigh letters. That story was just kind of an okay origin story backup, not anything special, pretty short to the point. The art in both stories is good. I would say that the art in the primary story is a little bit better overall, and the colors are fine. The stories were good. I think the main story definitely has potential. They probably could turn Crime Syndicate into its own story storyline, but I don't think it's really going to be anything more than the occasional miniseries. But I did enjoy it. I thought it was a pretty fun read, but you definitely have to have read at least last issue in order to get the most out of this. You probably want to read the whole miniseries, but as its own thing, yeah, you could probably enjoy this fine. They do a decent job of kind of bringing you up to speed, and it's an interesting switch on the regular DC characters. So yeah, I'll recommend it. I think it's probably going to be better as a trade, but if you can find the regular issues for a cheap price, I would say pick them up. The backup stories are just little additions, they're not anything spectacular, but they do add a little bit more substance to the Crime Syndicate characters. So if you get a chance, check it out. I would recommend it. Pretty decent stuff out of DC without all the politics nonsense. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods, and as always, we hope to see you on the next one. Welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Crime Syndicate Issue 6. This is the final installment of the 6-part miniseries from DC Comics, written by Andy Schmidt, pencils by Kieran McCowan. Dexter Vines was the inker, Steve Oliff colorist, Rob Lay letterer, cover by Howard Porter and Romulo Fajardo Jr., assistant editor Marquis Draper, edited by Andrea Shea, senior editor Chris Conroy. The cover's good, but it doesn't really tell you anything about what's going on in the story. And what we start off with is a knockdown drag-out fight between Ultraman and Ultra Girl. Now, when the Legion of Justice thought they had converted Emerald Knight, they were wrong, and it's pretty obvious when he does some really nasty things on Demon Island. And although Thal and Superwoman try and stop him, it only reinforces his true nature, which results in some really nasty things. Now, several members of the Legion of Justice do not fare well in this story, and in fact, it looks like most of them are either decimated, defeated, or dead. And the Crime Syndicate does become the ruling power, as you would expect, because that's the Earth 3 timeline. So while it is not a positive ending, it is an appropriate one for a story about villains. There is a backup story called My Pleasure's Your Pain. It's the origin of Atomica, written by Andy Schmidt, art by Brian Hitch, Alex Sinclair colors, Rob Lay letters. And this is a real short story. It's about 5 pages long and kind of goes over her origin and does reveal the fate of Alexander Luthor. So all in all, a interesting story about some very bad people doing very bad people things. It was a pretty good miniseries. If you like villain books especially, you'll really like this one, but I don't think it's going to appeal to everyone. These issues don't go for a whole lot, so it should be pretty easy to find these in back issue bins and bargain boxes. I think it was collected in a trade paperback, but I'm not positive on that. If you pick it up in trade, I'd try and find it for about $6, because I think anything over $6 to $12 is probably overpriced. Same with the single issues. If you don't get the whole thing for between $1 to $2 a piece, you're probably overpaying. But it's an interesting story, so it's worth a read, but it's not going to be something that's worth putting a whole bunch of money down for, even if you like supervillain books. The art's fine, the story's fine, the backups are interesting. I didn't have any problems with that. It just isn't the most compelling thing or most memorable book you're going to read this year. So worth a read, but definitely not worth paying a lot of money for. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.